Oh, thank you very much, Paul. And good morning and welcome to everybody. I'm Nigel Gilbert. I'm the director of CECAN, the Centre for the Evaluation of Complexity Across the Nexus. We were founded 9 years ago with support from the Economic and Social Research Council and from other founders. Our mission is to understand how one can evaluate complex public policies. And over the years, we've had the pleasure of working with a wide range of organisations, including government departments, public agencies, NGOs, businesses, and evaluation consultants. It's great to see so many of you here today. Nearly 125 people from all those sectors have registered today. So let's get started. Today's theme is Global Perspectives on Complex Evaluation, and we've got some great speakers lined up to explore this topic with us. I'm looking forward to what will surely be an interesting look at how policy evaluation is evolving internationally, as well as some thoughtful ideas about how different regions compare and contrast when navigating the challenges of public policy in a complex world. This year, our sessions will feature a series of live interview-style conversations with international experts from Europe and the US, and each interview will be followed by an open question and answer session. Our first interview this morning is with Peter van der Knaap, Director of the Policy and Operations Evaluation Department in The Hague, and President of the European Evaluation Society. He brings a wealth of international experience from across the evaluation sector. After that, we'll hear from May Pettigrew, the recent past president of the European Evaluation Society and an independent evaluation specialist with over 25 years of experience across strategy, policy, and impact evaluation, including senior evaluation posts at the European Commission and UNESCO. Following our morning sessions, we'll have an optional open space session at lunchtime. This is going to be a flexible forum hosted by our facilitator, Dr. Paul Brand, who you've already heard from, who is the England and Wales Chair of the International Association of Facilitators. You'll be able to propose your own topics or questions for breakout group discussions based on the morning interviews. After lunch, we'll shift our focus to the US. First, we'll hear from Bianca Montrose-Moorhead, a professor of research methods, measurement and evaluation at the University of Connecticut, who specializes in evaluation methodology, theory, and capacity building. Then, to wrap up our interview sessions for the day, Eileen Reed, an associate professor of educational research methodology at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, will share her perspective. She's over 20 years of evaluation experience and has presented and published her work in program evaluation, education, and the STEM disciplines in North America, Latin America, and Australia. So, star-studded day. Before we begin, just a few quick administrative notes. The interviews with each speaker will last for about 25 minutes. They'll be followed by 20 minutes for your questions, which will be hosted by Paul. We suggest you turn off your videos for each of the interviews, but switch them on again for the audience Q&A. You can raise questions by typing them into the Q&A box in Zoom, which you'll find probably at the bottom of your Zoom window. You'll also be able to upvote and comment on other people's questions. The chat box, there's a chat box as well as the Q&A, The chat box will be open throughout the day, but please use this as a space for general comments and networking with other attendees. We ask that you keep all questions for the speakers in the Q&A box so we don't miss them. With large numbers that we're expecting on the call, please stay muted throughout unless Paul has asked you to unmute, and then ask your question from the Q&A list. The interviews and Q&A sections will be recorded and made available on the CECAN website after the conference. The open space session at lunchtime will not be recorded. There'll be a short 15-minute break between sessions for a coffee or a stretch and a longer lunch break. And then finally, we'll be using the same Zoom link that you're already on all day, so you can stay connected throughout. So lots of administrative things there. I hope it's all straightforward. I'm now going to have the pleasure of introducing Emma Pritchard, who's a reader at the Centre for Interdisciplinary Methodologies at the University of Warwick in England, and has been part of the CECAN team for many years. Emma will be interviewing our first speaker for today, Peter van der Knaap. So over to you, Emma. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Nigel, and welcome in, Peter.
Good morning.
Morning, Peter. First clarification I have is about your last name. Is it Knaap or van der Knaap?
Yeah. It's actually van der Knaap, so pretty good, Knaap.
Van der Knaap.
I used to live in Indianapolis for a while, and I had a list of how people mispronounce my name all the time, and I think Tilinap was the number one, with Samba War number 2. So
yeah,
you're doing great.
Yeah, I relate to that. Mine is also you, Pritchard, but everyone calls me up Pritchard. But well, welcome to CECAN and the CECAN Conference. I was very excited to be paired up with you for lots of different reasons, which we'll go through. And essentially, I mean, Nigel's already introduced you a little bit, but I'll say a little bit more. But I'll be covering around 5 topics, just to let the audience, but also yourself know, a bit about your career, evaluation in the Netherlands, a little bit about complexity, potentially speak to that. Well, I'm very interested in that. Issues of standardization and transferability at a global level. And if we've got time, a bit about the future as it may or may not be known. But yeah, going back to your bio, I was, you've got a list of very impressive titles from the director of IOB, which is the Independent Evaluation Directorate in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands, president of Evaluation Society, co-chair of the OECD DAC, or Development Assistance Committee Evaluation Network. But even before that, you were doing SWOV, the Road Safety Institute, the Performance Audit in Netherlands, the Evaluation Research for Netherlands Ministry of Finance, and of course you have your own PhD from Erasmus University, and you're still able to be a member of the Evaluation Journal. And I missed out what you had listed of the president of the Dutch Evaluation Society as well. So, but I was really impressed with these different spaces, from finance to road safety to foreign affairs, and you've obviously got a kind of really good perspective. So I'm going to enjoy picking your brains a little bit. But how you've obviously decided very early on to be committed to evaluation. Was there something that drew you to that area?
Thanks for inviting me. I really liked it. And I also like the questions because it forces you to look back at what you've been doing for the last 35 years. The reason I started to do evaluation that was when I started my PhD. It was in a research group focusing on how to increase the learning capabilities, learning capacity of government. And obviously, already back then, I was about 20, I think 25, 24 years old. I think, well, evaluation has this feedback function and also the social learning capacities that are really interesting to look into. And then I wanted to travel. So I thought, well, why not do my PhD on theoretically how do governments learn from evaluation and how can they increase that learning and combine it with accountability? And then travel back and forth to Brussels all the time to look at the evaluations of the structural funds, basically by the European Union, and how those lessons were being taken up by the European Commission. So that's when I started it. And when you give an overview of what I did ever since, I'm a bit of a one-trick pony, let's be honest about it. But I think the main thing that keeps me going, it's not just fun, because it is fun, it is also important work. Especially when you're into policy areas like road safety and you see the impact that really evidence-based measures, programs that really make a difference in terms of casualties, in terms of people not getting injured. It is good to do the things we do as evaluators and to keep doing them and to keep saying, well, you can do that, but if you really want to reduce victims, you really should be looking at the system perspective. It's not going to be easy. You're about to go into it for the long term, but then it will yield results. And that makes, I think, get me out of the bed every morning.
Yeah, it's a great area. And you say one trick pony, but actually there's so much to be explored and, as you say, learnt, continuously relearnt through the different spaces. You mentioned road safety and go straight into kind of the issue of killing and dying and so on. In some respects, you could argue that all evaluation has that potential. Maybe
Absolutely.
is that something?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. If you look at the things we do at IOB, they're just as important. It makes all the difference if you spend your money in humanitarian assistance in a certain way compared to another way. And if you have an evaluation research pointing out what really works, or simply say, well, you've been trying this for the last 20 years and we do not find the evidence that it is making a difference in the lives of the end beneficiaries. That is important to point out to policymakers and politicians. They sometimes, and I think that's one of the lessons that I took from my PhD back in the 1990s, it sometimes takes a little bit of time for people to learn the lesson. And there's also this, I think, this human need to say, well, we've been doing this because we thought so, to defend actually what you've been doing. And as an evaluator, I hold it very dear that the difficult part of our work is you're always judging other people's work. And if they're committed to their work, you're always judging their beings. So it's important to them. So you should allow for a certain mechanism of being perceived as somebody who is a threat, maybe, saying the things that they don't want to hear in first instance. You have to allow for the certain defensive mechanisms. But in the end, and that was, I think, the key point that I took from the European Union structural funds case. If you go back 1 year, 1.5 years, you see actually the things that were being recommended in those evaluations being taken up by policymakers and politicians and starting to make a difference. And I think that's important.
That's really interesting. I like, it's interesting because as I was sort of thinking about today, and you've clearly got this kind of macro level lens to different parts of the evaluation process. But I was thinking that you also have to have, and that you've brought it out already, a human basis, like understanding that there are individuals there who, interestingly, I hadn't thought of the defensiveness that people can bring. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because that sounds, from a systems perspective, almost like a block, but if you know about it, how do you work with that?
Well, it starts with the question: are these policymakers, are these people in the position to make a difference actually recognizing the challenges and the problems that they are supposed to do something about, or not? And I like this notion of, if it's a complex situation leading to problems like road casualties or like hunger or what have you, do they recognize that they should be looking for real solutions instead of just doing something because it can be done, it's cheap, it can be done quickly, it will lead to relatively little resistance or no resistance at all. And then you come up with sorts of policy measures that are simple, that are visible, that are not costing a lot of money, but they do not work. And I think if you're an evaluator and you see this position being taken deliberately, in spite of the fact that they recognize that actually what they need to be doing is something that is expensive, that is taking a lot of work, that is taking a long-term perspective, that is dependent on all sorts of actors that you need to influence in order to get your objective being achieved, then you should be really harsh on those people and say, well, you're just doing something because it looks good, but not because you want to make a difference. Whereas where you have people that are recognizing the complexity and sometimes the enormous task of trying to make a change, and they're willing to be vulnerable and saying, well, we're open to what's not working and we're willing to learn from that, and they mean it, I think you have a different ballgame. The type 1 evaluations, when I was director with the Court of Audit, we call it, sometimes you need to punch a bloody nose to say, well, against every evidence that's out there, you continue to do the things that are not working, and to actually waste people's money and time. We told you, so now we tell you again, and whereas as in the type 2 evaluations, where you see people struggling, but learning and investing in strategies and knowledge finding, ongoing evaluation and monitoring, taking a much more responsive approach, then you should be understanding, especially when it does lead to lessons being taken up already. I think that's the main thing that you always, and when I start an evaluation here with my team, we often ask this question: okay, what did the last evaluation tell us, and how did they pick it up? And are they really interested in improving their policy programs, or are they just doing it for the Bühne, as the Germans would say it, so to make good appearances? I think that's the starting point, and then from there you can build a strategy for influence.
Yeah, that's nice. Sort of meeting people with where they're at, but with also, I heard the term bloody nose and harshness. So I think it's interesting to have these both approaches, the very understanding, compassionate perspective for those who may require that, but equally a slightly harsher.
Yes, still being honest, of course. We're not out there to do the bloody nose because it looks good in the papers.
No, yeah.
Although it helps, of course, especially when you're with an independent evaluation function that's a lot of our influence is being based on that we are visible and that we are known and that we are there and that parliamentarians know how to find us and using our evidence. And I've been doing this work now from this position, which is a relatively well-organized, well-established directorate within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The same goes for courts of audit, of course. But this Road Safety Institute was more on the margin and had to struggle for budget every time. And then you really also need to be very clear, okay, we are getting your money for doing this evaluation, but it doesn't mean that we are not going to say the truth and to inform the people what is really going on. because that's in the end what it's all about. That you're credible in the policy debate, in the arena of spending money to programs that really make a difference in people's lives. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, it's nice. You've mentioned budgets and money a few times, and obviously that's very important. And how do you, in moving on to kind of evaluation in the Netherlands or in your expertise in general, how do these budgets help to make change, do the bloody nose issue, or reward? And you mentioned there also an interesting situation.
We also look at on the back evaluations, by the way. No, I
Absolutely.
think it's a good question. I think what sets the Netherlands apart from a lot of other countries is we've been doing policy analysis or program or project appraisal, I think, from the 1700s, because of the fight against the rising sea level. Well, not back then rising, but obviously now it's important. So a lot of the waterworks have been supported by policy analysis from the 1920s already. So doing policy analysis in terms of water and infrastructure is really natural to us. But then you're right, I think money is important, and especially the Ministry of Finance, like in the many other countries, has a central role in the evaluation system here. And actually their regulation is connected to the spending items of the ministry budgets. Quite simply, every spending line item with a certain strategic importance needs to be evaluated once every 4 to 7 years using synthesis evaluations. And this is really something that's been going on for 25 years now. We started it back when I was at the Ministry of Finance. And it really does help to connect government spending to results.
Yes.
There are risks and there are advantages of that approach.
Can you? I love the fact that the Netherlands have had that long history of evaluation. That there's already an acceptance that this is an important area. On the issue of risk and benefits, I have my own suspicions, but from your own expertise and learnings, is it easy to sum up or difficult to sum up what the risks of having these budgets?
Well, to be honest,
or benefits.
Cost effectiveness is central to what the Ministry of Finance, the Treasury, is looking for. So they are looking for, are we getting results for our precious tax money that is being spent out there? So
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, that's really important when you work at the Ministry of Finance, and I think that it's understandable, but especially when societal challenges are difficult to solve or to deal with, it's not always clear what is the return on your euro. Then you need to really tell the story about, this problem is being caused by lots of different factors. So if you want to solve it, you also should be looking at interfering with lots of different factors too, and you're dependent on the European Union or on municipalities. You need not just the measures, but also a certain way of making sure measures are being carried out in the proper way. So you need supervision. I think those are the things that are transparent. So it can lead to a rather simplistic approach to evaluation. But if you work at the Treasury, there's one thing I learned while working there: the combination of having the budget, so the money, and the ability to ask simple questions like, did it work, or what are the results? That's a powerful one, and that's also a risky one, because it can lead to simplistic and also fill in the blanks exercises by evaluation consultants doing just what the Ministry of Finance wants, following the rules instead of really asking the questions that should be asked and taking, when necessary, a long-term learning perspective. So this is a risk. Also, the risk of this mandatory evaluations once every 4 to 7 years may lead to evaluation and evaluating policy programs becoming a chore, sort of an obligation, where defense becomes first instead of, development and learning. The advantage is these risks and disadvantages can be discussed. Second, it will be on the agenda, so there's no long. You won't find any program in Holland that's not been evaluated for 10 or 20 years. That's out of the questions. And of course, there are good evaluators that are capable of taking this regulation from the Ministry of Finance and still ask the right questions, still finding ways to say, well, these are the conditions for cost effectiveness. We cannot say anything hard on the cost effectiveness as of now, but we are able to say something about the prerequisites for cost effectiveness, and they're not in place. And the Ministry of Finance, they have smart people, they understand that. So the other advances, I think, that is on the ex-ante side of things, it has led to certain instruments. They called it a policy compass, but it is actually the kind of questions that a state council would ask: is this policy program going to work or not? What are the chances that it may work? Did they took the right approach? Are they open, for instance, to negative side effects or not? And this evaluative thinking has been stimulated, I think, to a large extent, thanks to the sometimes a little bit too narrow financial regulations by the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah, do you find that because they know that there's going to be a mandatory evaluation in 4 to 7 years, that they almost design the policy to make it look successful from the outset, rather than doing actually what's really needed is this harder, slower, messier work?
Well, you sometimes think, I always start by looking what would have happened without any policy interference.
It's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Unemployment policies or trade measures or whatever, nature, biodiversity, what would have happened without? And sometimes you see, well, actually, without doing anything, the target would have been met. If you look at the planning bureau's expectations, so then it's of course always a fun question: why bother with interfering in the first place? So that's an important one. Second, and I see this in many policy areas, not just in international affairs, but also road safety, you name it, where actually the expectations, the ambitions can be politically well felt, but if you compare it to what's actually being done and what's actually being set aside to spend on a certain issue, you can forecast, it will never make any difference, because politicians, probably like a lot of people, we like things cheap, easy, fast, visible, whereas a lot of the things that are needed are expensive, take a long-term perspective, will lead to resistance by people that lose. So it's difficult, it's messy, it takes a long-term perspective, and that's something that is at odds, of course, with also the political culture of today.
But I do like your initial response, which is like, what would it be without the evaluation in the first place? Even simple. I think that's really important.
I think that do no harm. Sorry to interfere you, but do no harm.
Good, please.
Yeah, do no harm is an important question, not just in medicine, but also if you want to solve hunger or inequality in your country or abroad, I would say. Think twice before you interfere with what's already there, and be prepared to be there, to be into it for the long haul, and to listen to people. What's really happening if we introduce this measure in your country or not? That's important.
Yeah, very important. It reminds me, I noticed, well, you're bilingual, but also you write in 2 languages, which is impressive. And the way you described these different literatures was that you were doing general evaluation in Dutch and mostly the positive and successful evaluations in the English language. And I thought, it reminds me a little bit of that, what you're saying about the what works is important, but also the positive attitude towards not just identifying the problems, what doesn't work, the obstacles. Is that something that you personally bring? I love the paper, by the way, on that. So that I was like, why isn't this more cited? Because for me, that's going back into the importance of the individuals working on these. And
actually, it was a bit of an effect when I was working a few years with the Court of Audit, and I compared ourselves as to be eager fault finders, where especially our audit colleagues, they were always very happy to find something that was not working or not in order. And I'm taking a slightly different perspective in life. But also, if you look at it from a learning perspective, we know from psychology, people tend to learn much more effectively from things that are positive and that are working, and from success. So here too, it is in Dutch, but I think everybody can understand what's being said there. What makes diplomacy successful? And it was actually something that I came up with, having read tens and tens of IOB evaluations, and there are things being in every report that actually do work with diplomats being successful in achieving results. So I thought, well, why not add it all up? So do a synthesis just on what works. And by the way, if you look at the recommendations on this report, they're pretty harsh. They're
like what?
Like recognize that being a diplomat is a skill. It's a profession that needs to be cherished. And you cannot send people that are fluent in Spanish to China and expect they have the same level of effect. So there are a lot of lessons that are just as important and just as harsh as if you would have done a normal evaluation. But it's now actually being used in diplomat classes. And that's something I think that is just a different take on what you've been doing, especially if you do it as a synthesis report. It can really, I think, increase our effectiveness as evaluation researchers.
Yeah, that on the methods front, when you say synthesis evaluation, is that like a meta evaluation, the evaluation of the evaluations? Is that how you approach synthesis? This word synthesis.
Yeah, well, we did this for this evaluation, but I was actually intrigued by a success. It was in I think it was with on the coast of Yemen. There was this oil tanker, and it has been rusting there for many years. And it actually, it should have led to, without any action, it would have led to a disaster compared to the Exxon Valdez back in the 70s. And it is really thanks to Dutch diplomats making sure there was security, safety, that there was money, that there was the capability to pump out the oil, that this disaster was being avoided. So it was not a proper evaluation, but it was a reconstruction of what was being done, and what the result was obviously a success. That led to this one. But there are other evaluations too. We did one at SWAF, the Road Safety Institute, of the measures that government took when they raised the speed limit on Dutch highways. And nobody said, well, you should evaluate it. And we felt it was really necessary to do it. But in the end, our evaluation informed us that actually the measures they took were quite successful in avoiding additional casualties on those highways. So it was a success. But then, of course, if you would have done that and still not increased the speed limits, you would have even saved more lives. So that's, but you have to be prepared always to also say, well, this is working. This is well done. This is actually being something. This is a problem that seems to have been tamed using knowledge monitoring, etc.
Yeah, and just picking up on your phrase about it wasn't a proper evaluation. What's your kind of minimum understanding of what a proper evaluation is?
Oh, we have, I think, 17 quality criteria IOB from the terms of reference to actually performing the evaluation and the reporting. And I think I sinned against almost every single one of those rules, so doing it all by myself, etc. So it wasn't really a proper evaluation.
I see.
And then the synthesis evaluation was We had a quality board, etc. So we put in place all the quality requirements that we ask also of other evaluators.
And are there proper methods for proper evaluations, or is that?
It depends. It depends. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm perhaps most proud of, is that we have a sort of a toolbox for evaluation methods. And it all depends. It depends on the questions. It depends on the knowledge that's out there. It depends on the policy issue that's at stake. It depends on the monitoring that's being done. And then, of course, which kind of resources do you have as an evaluator? And this toolbox really guides you through all those important questions, suggesting the types of quantitative and qualitative methods that you can use. Do you need statistical analysis? Do you need an experimental approach? What about responsive interviews and focus groups? Do you need to visit? So, and I think there are no right or wrong methods. It all depends on the questions and the context of the evaluation and the policy program.
So moving into the area of complexity then, systems thinking. I know myself and some people were not in and out of CECAN would argue that from a complex systems perspective, randomized controlled trials are potentially a wrong method. That's what's your view on that? If I can push you a little bit.
If you have suppose you want to fight hunger in a certain region, and or you want to improve health in a certain region, and you know it's not just the seed, or it's not just building a hospital. It's also about safety. It's about water. It's about electricity. It's about staff. You can really then look at all those different things, and you will recognize that it's not just one project or one program, but you probably need lots of projects. And then within a complex program, my take is you can still use RCTs to see what kind of seed or what kind of fertilizer or what kind of employment policy for a certain health issue works. You can do that. But you can never, and you can also use statistical analysis to compare complex programs in the end, one next to the other.
Yeah.
But to really understand the dynamics and the interplay, you need to go deeper. So you need to have the more qualitative approach to it. And of course, since the realist revolution, we know that you have to pay special attention to the context as well. And then you're making sensible use of the toolbox of the evaluator.
Yeah. I see Paul's on the screen. Does that mean our time is up, Paul, or do we have a few more minutes?
That's a subtle indication from Gail that it's time-ish to give space for others to ask questions.
Well, can I...
You just have one last one, yes.
About good practice and successful evaluations and issues around complex systems, would you say that there is a possible standardization or transferability issue, or do we not do that? I liked your point about it depends, which seems to contrast and clash with this notion of standardization. What's your view on how we work with?
It depends, and I'm always a bit allergic to people saying, well, you should never use RCTs because it's or you should always use qualitative approach, or you should always use outcome harvesting. It really depends, and I think the worst thing that can happen is the big swings from the quantitative to the qualitative, or from RCTs away from RCTs. That's not really helpful as I see it. I think the proper way to do it is to look at the strengths and also the weaknesses of every approach, every method, and to come to combinations of methods and approaches that are helpful for specific evaluation. In the book in Dutch, we try to combine this, comparing the type 1, type 3, and type 2 evaluation methods and approaches, and to really come up with suggestions. If this is the thing that you are about to evaluate, you like the toolbox, think of these approaches instead of rather this. And the worst thing that is happening is, and we have seen it but this will take hours to explain perhaps, but the learning evaluation approach being used as to avoid accountability evaluation. To say, well, we take a learning approach, so then that's not really, it's not truthful. It's not, it's just a way to use an evaluation term not to be accountable. And I think that's not what you want.
Why don't we?
Yeah, I like that. Thank you. Yeah,
thought there, Peter, for a second.
Thank you, Emma.
Yeah.
We might ask him in a
Thank you,
minute.
Peter.
How
There'll be more for you.
Thank you, Emma. Peter, we are open for questions now. The audience is currently being very shy in that there's nobody typing anything in. So I'm going to just leave them quiet for a minute to think about what they might want to ask. You take a pause and have a drink. Let's just leave the audience quiet. Folks, you can type into the Q&A in Zoom. If you can't see the Q&A button, it might be under the 3 dots more bit and you have to put something in. Or given the quietness of the current Q&A box, you can just raise a hand and we'll bring you in to ask a question.
I've also still got plenty if we need
and
to.
You've got more. But
I'll
let's leave the
let
space
the
for
audience
others to jump in. So unusually for a workshop, I'm going to leave everything completely quiet for 1 minute while you think about it, and then we'll see whether that generates any thoughts from people.
I prepared some lessons from this position that I'm holding right now.
I'm going to let them have 1 minute's thought for it, Peter,
Okay.
and then we'll let you open your box of tricks as well if there's nothing very specific. I have one, but let's let people give it a moment. People may be so overwhelmed with the information they've received that they have no questions at all. Sophia is first up. Why don't you unmute, Sophia, and ask Peter your unmute and pop your video on if you want, and bring your question to Peter, and then we'll take any further comments from there. Yeah. Where's Sophia?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Can't see you, but we can hear you.
Yeah, that's a bit weird, but I can't fix it now. I'll go ahead with my question if that's all right. So yes, I would like to thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. Whether from your experience, Peter, there are any noticeable differences between the Dutch and the broader European context in terms of evaluation methods, any in terms of buying from both contexts?
Yeah, that's an intriguing question. I think part of it I probably touched upon when I explained the necessity to find things that work in terms of water management, which has led to a rather business-like approach to, okay, will this help keep our feet dry? Will this be sufficient? So this effectiveness combined to being Dutch, always a bit looking for, is this the money well spent? I think is one thing that sets perhaps this country a little bit apart from other countries, although compared to the Anglo-Saxon American way of looking, I think well, we've been there, I think, in the first wave of evaluation together with you guys, Scandinavians and the Americans, and the French, and also the other nations perhaps picking up a bit later than us. The second thing, we are used to, it's called a polder model. So we are used to work together in this polder, which is this artificially created land which would have been flooded if we were not successful building dikes, etc. So we need to recognize different interests and to work together in preparing policy interventions, in implementation. And I think this has also a certain influence on doing evaluations, where we tend to listen to, first of all, the people that were responsible for the policy and the policy implementation. But I think more and more also recognizing it's really the beneficiaries, the people that we are supposed to be helping with this program that need to be represented in our evaluation approach. So I think responsiveness in combination with cost effectiveness are things that are quite natural to the Dutch approach, perhaps, to evaluation. As a third, but this is probably not particularly Dutch is, of course, it's a political game too. So asking the questions, the wrong questions. For instance, how did farmers appreciate this measure to, do this or do that? It's not about effectiveness. It's about appreciation of a certain way the program is being carried out. But it's less harmful than if you asking the question, did it really help to save biodiversity or to make food more safe or not? And this political game is played, but I'm not sure that this is not played in other countries as well. I think it probably is. A third, but I'm a bit hesitating. Is this what I touched upon when I said taking a learning approach in order to avoid accountability? I think that's perhaps also something that maybe typically Dutch to misuse a certain experiment in order not to get too much negative effects from an evaluation. But then again, maybe I'm too cynical here. There is enough space to say, well, this is not what is intended here. This is not the right use of learning evaluation. So let's stop playing these games. And that's, I think, also perhaps rather Dutch to also point out when things are not going as they should have.
I was wondering about that, Peter. I was thinking about having worked in Singapore with multinationals, different nationalities would have a different attitude to what they considered a challenge on that. Manila de Lewis has a question. I'm just seeing whether we can get him or her on video question. This is about the difference between cost effectiveness and actual real value. Manila, are you there? Yes, there you are.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're on. You're on.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for your words. They were so interesting, and I have been thinking and analyzing your words all these 20 minutes. Very interesting. Thank you. I focused on one concept, which is the concept of value, because actually now I think this is the key, because value is what leads our decision making, our actions, and so on. So value is multifaceted, we know, because it's the value of the policy makers who take decision, but also the value of people who who have to deal with these decisions that are made. So it would be maybe useful also in a systemic, under a systemic point of view, to have some sort of steps up front that can take into consideration this diversity and multifaceted range of values. So it's something that is very difficult to deal with today. Just one example, also circular economy. It's about consumer behavior. So it's about value. It's the way we decide and we take our decisions. So what's your experience with this concept? How can evaluation methods take it into consideration, if they take into consideration enough, or maybe what can be done to focus more on this concept in evaluation processes in a practical way, in a way that takes into considerations also the different time horizons that are involved within the process?
Excellent question, and I fully agree. It's in the word evaluation value, so it's important, and I also agree that at first glance, things like beauty or safety or freedom are hard to quantify, and especially hard to put a price tag on it. I always like to drive my colleagues mad by still trying to do just that. Because I think it makes a difference if you look at the entire set of things that government is there for, to make sure that societies are, well, we used to say are getting better, and now it's perhaps to stop the backsliding. And then it makes sense to compare, to really translate things like safety or freedom into things that you can perhaps still measure. Quality adjusted life years, for instance, is an example that it's not perfect, but at least if you're into looking what is the best safety result of a certain measure, you can use to compare the cost effectiveness and thereby what should be done if you have limited resources in order to make a certain situation or a certain country more safe. And the same, I think, goes for things like freedom. So it's always tempting to say, well, this is a value that's very important, but we cannot quantify it. I always like to challenge that, but I'm aware that there are limits to that. And if you're talking about circular economy, yes, it is behavior. By the way, behavioral measures are one of my favorites to evaluate because, especially campaigns, they tick all the boxes. They're cheap, they can be done tomorrow, they're popular, they will lead to little resistance. But we know from thousands of evaluations without additional measures in terms of, nudging in a certain direction of supervision, policing, you need them to go together. And behavior can, of course, lead to more reusing of plastic and metals, for instance. And that's in the end what you should be looking for. So this tendency sometimes to see collaboration and happiness with a certain policy program as values in itself, I can understand it, but only as long as they will go hand in hand with what's really at stake. And there we should use, I think, the tools that we have to make them quantifiable while recognizing the pitfalls and all the risks that come with that. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. When you talk about quantify, it's not important the number itself, but it's important that it gives a range, a direction. So that's the role of the number, not the quantity in itself. That can be. I think it
was
can
a minister, and he put it beautifully into language. He said, "Well, they're not reality, but for me, they're the guiding lights for my policy."
Thank you.
Let's go on to a new question. I think we're going to Australia. Dorothy Lux, are you there and able to pop your mic? There we are. Am I right? Yep. You're down under, Dorothy?
Indeed, Western Australia.
Off you go.
Great, thank you. Hi, Peter. Thanks for that. It's really interesting. I liked what you said about the learning approach should not avoid accountability. And in evaluation, complex evaluations where there's soft power involved, like the work you've done with diplomacy, it's very difficult to get access to real information. So the data which you might need to make those kind of accountability assessments. So you working in that sphere, how have you gone down the complex information pathways to find the information that you actually need for accountability, not only learning?
Yeah, I like accountability and learning. I like the concept. I think Elliot Stern deserves credit for saying, well, it's not just about accountability or about learning. You're being responsible or accountable for learning. And that is something I think that you can investigate, research, evaluate. And you're right, especially when it comes down to foreign policy and looking at how diplomatic efforts made or did not make a difference. It's not as easy as, for instance, comparing speed limits, the speed of cars before and after a certain new infrastructure layout. That's something that can be measured. Diplomatic influence can only be reconstructed and interpreted, and it's less quantifiable, of course. And then, if it's a real good diplomat, she or he will never say, "Well, it was my success." she or he will always say it was the Brits, that they were very important in achieving this, or the Australians. Without the Australians, it would never have been possible to do this. So you have to be very open and transparent in your methodology. You have to be not jumping higher than the stick allows. So you have to be speaking in terms of it's logical or it's plausible that what's been done in this field has led to this respect, and it's been validated by this other source of evidence. So I think triangulation is important there. And then coming back to perhaps the beginning, it's also, of course, recognizing the human effort that goes into things like this, saying, well, we as in evaluators are convinced that without this program, this change that can be measured would not have taken place without perhaps the combination of factors, because it's never just diplomatic efforts. It's always combined to other sources of influence and power that have been brought to the system that we think make this change in the end or not. Because to be honest, we did a positive evaluation, but especially when you have fragile contacts, it's very hard to achieve international results because often resources are too limited, the time perspective is too short, and you really should be careful to expect too much out of foreign policy interventions.
I'm going to draw that one to a close. Thank you so much, Dorothy. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
One left over there, Peter, that you mentioned an evaluation toolkit. People asking whether there's a link you can pop in the chat for that when we close the session.
Yeah.
Are you able to stay with us for the rest of the morning, or do you have to dash off and do other things?
I can stay with you for 10 minutes, and then I have to address my my directorate.
That's true. Well, I think you have 10 minutes of coffee break then, so I think like the rest of us, you have a break. So thank you so much for getting us up and running. We have a 15-minute break now. 15 minutes, we're back here with conversation with Mary Pettigrew, interviewed by Penny Hawkins. Participants, you can either just mute and pop your camera off, or you can leave the meeting and come back in. We will start promptly at 11:15. I think all that remains is now to say thank you so much to Peter and to Emma for getting us going, and we will see you all in 15 minutes' time.
Thank you for the invitation. It was my pleasure.